I go by the name Shotade Olusegun. In today's live session, I'm going to dissect with you the possibility, or rather, let me say, the feasibility of time technology, which we actually serve as alternative, for this currently available AI technology. So now, it is highly essential for us to embark and to even develop this time technology because humans will have control over that particular time technology so as to, solve most of the problems that AI will be able to solve for us. So now we need to take, our destiny into our hands. Like we need to know what is actually happening. We have to be in control. So that is what time technology is all about because it's going to be in form of, computer that we use, four number instead of binary. It will be quadnary. I call it quadnary. So I will dive deeply into what time technology is and how that can actually rescue us from the impending dangers of AI technology. Now, before we dissect what time technology is, I want us to watch this particular video. So this video that we're going to watch, I'm going to review that video and I'm going to use that to open our eyes to that, to the option that we are like, let me say the choice that we have, the situation that we have at hand is that God is actually placing before us two choices and we have to pick one. So God has placed before us life and death. So it is left for us to pick either life or death. So now, with no further ado, let's dive into it.
How does your brain process what you see on the screen? To you, there could be 6 triangles arranged to form a hexagon. Or you could see it as a hexagon whose outer vertices are all connected to the central vertex. Both ways of seeing are correct. But how about now? Now your brain is thinking, there's no hexagon at all. It's a cube. Suddenly your mind went from 2D mode to 3D, even though you're still looking at a flat screen. You understand that some edges have to intersect on the screen you're watching to represent the cube. Despite the intersections, you know none of cube's edges actually overlap. The way we look at the world in 2D mode is totally different from how we see it in 3D. But will humans be ever capable of comprehending 4 dimensions and beyond? For the sake of clarity, let's define a few terms. Topology. It's a branch of mathematics concerned with the properties of a geometric object that are preserved under continuous deformations. For example, the number of holes that a donut has. No matter how much we stretch, twist, crumple, or bend it, it will always have one hole. Manifold. In simple terms, it's anything that can exist in any dimension. For example, one-dimensional manifolds include lines and circles. Two-dimensional manifolds include open surfaces such as a plane, topological versions of the plane, a disk, and an annulus, and closed surfaces such as a sphere and a torus. Three-dimensional manifolds include a ball, also known as a solid sphere, a solid torus, or commonly a donut, and a tetrahedron. On the other hand, a boundary for our purposes refers to an abrupt stop to a surface. For example, the boundary of this plane is the 4 edges surrounding it, and the boundary of this annulus is the 2 concentric circles that define its shape. Applying topological transformations does not remove or add new boundaries. A sphere or a torus, on the other hand, doesn't have a boundary since they are closed surfaces. Now, consider an open 2D manifold. It's easy to see it has two sides, one on the top and the other on the bottom. If an ant is on one side, it must cross the boundary to reach the other side. Here's a riddle. Can you come up with a 2D manifold that has only one side? That is, where an ant on the top side can reach the bottom side without crossing a boundary? And is that even possible? Pause the video now if you want to think about it. A particular way to do this is to get a strip and join one edge to its opposite. But before doing so, give the strip a half twist, then connect them. The resulting one-sided surface is called a Mobius strip. To prove its one-sidedness, notice that an ant crawling along one side of the strip will eventually reach the other side. In other words, the top and bottom sides are actually the same side. Zooming in, we can see the boundaries on either side appear to run relatively parallel along the whole length of the Mobius strip. And as we know, parallel lines never intersect. But taking a step back, we see that the strip only has one continuous boundary. Isn't that creepy? Another cool thing you can do to Mobius strips is cut them in half. We have this notion that cutting anything in half, well, will result in two separate parts of the thing we're cutting. But take a look at what happens when we try to cut the Mobius strip in half. It doesn't split into two. But how? Keep in mind there is only one continuous boundary. Since the cut in the middle never gets to the boundary, the strip doesn't cut into separate pieces. Another way to intuitively visualize this is to first cut the original strip in half, bend so the edges can meet, give a half twist, and then finally join the opposite edges. If you think that's cool, consider cutting 1/3 along the width of the Mobius strip. Cutting along it, we find it takes two trips around the Mobius strip for the cut to form a closed loop. Separating the parts, we get this. Now that's real trippy. But we can visualize this by first doing the cut, the twist, and then joining the edges. Now, in a seemingly different direction, ever heard of the grandfather paradox? The grandfather paradox is usually used to disprove the existence of time travel. The idea is that if you were to travel back in time to kill your grandfather before he had your mother, then it would be impossible for your mom to have been born. So you wouldn't have been born to travel back in time and kill your grandfather in the first place. Thus, it's a paradox. And some people would assert that because of this potential logical inconsistency, time travel cannot exist. But there's supposedly a clever way to resolve this. And to do that, you guessed it, we use a Mobius strip. Let's represent a timeline on the surface of a Mobius strip. Suppose in 2021 you gain access to a time machine for unknown reasons, and you decide to travel back in time to kill your grandfather when he was still a child, still for unknown murderous reasons. So now you're back in 1940 and you kill your grandfather. If your grandfather is dead as a kid in 1940, in 1970 your mother can't have been born, and in the year 2000 you can't have been born. So in 2021 there was no you to travel back in time. Now here's where it's different. We just simply move past this paradoxical point and see what happens. If there's no you to travel back in time in the first place, then there's no one to kill your grandfather in 1940. So he would be alive to have your mother in 1970, and your mom is present to give birth to you in the year 2000. And by 2021, you use a time machine to travel back in time to kill your grandfather, and the cycle repeats forever. Now we see that the whole surface of the Mobius strip is written over. And the nifty thing about using the Mobius strip is that opposite events like your mother is born and your mother is not born are precisely on the locally opposite sides of the Mobius strip. In 2000, you were born and not born at the same time. In 2021, you travel back in time and do not travel back in time simultaneously. In 1940, you kill your grandfather and not kill your grandfather at the same time. Each event and its opposite is happening at the same time along the length of the strip. It looks much more of a paradox than a paradox it is trying to resolve. Still, when you restrict your thinking along the looping events happening at the surface, the logic behind the causes and effects seems to bend smoothly. It's become a causal loop. So the reason why you had to kill your grandfather in the very first place? You did that so you could live. Isn't that amazing? Let's take
Okay, so that is it. Now we have the idea of, having what is synonymous to life and death. In that time travel, in that grandfather paradox, you can see that at any point in time, there is this possibility of you being in that moment, being alive. And at the same time, there is a flipped version of that at that point in time, which is being dead. You understand? So, at any given time in space, we have two possibilities. And so, when you look at this issue of chirality, you can get to see that the left-sided chemical formation, or the left-sided cloned version of the right-sided chemical synthesis, you see that that particular left-sided is not being biologically supported. It is only the right-sided, or right, yes, right-sided part that is actually biologically supported. So definitely there is a path that we need to actually follow in the universe to ensure the essence or the feasibility of being alive or to live. You understand? So that is why time travel is so difficult, because if there is any wrong movement, it could actually lead to death. You understand? So now we have the picture of what I'm trying to paint right here, which is the possibility or the feasibility of having life and death being placed before us. So now we have this choice, and the choice, the virtue of having choice, that is the feasibility of free will that we humans we have. So we have this liberty of choosing either life or death. So presently, we have this AI technology that we are actually, using. But then, even the developers, the creators of these AI technologies, they have been, clamoring for, they have been clamoring for that AI technology to be stopped or to be scrapped. Why? Because they have seen the impending dangers that many of us do not see. And so, based on that, they are like trying to warn us. But then, by deriving formula of everything to unify quantum mechanics to classical mechanics, then I got to know what these people have been clamoring about. Now, there is no solution to curb AI. There is no solution to curb AI because AI is an autonomous agent. It has the liberty of deciding either to be good or to be evil. And that is why we need to actually look for the alternative. Now, based on my research discovery, I realized, and in this video, I'm going to show you the reason we cannot even react fast enough to what AI might, likely do in the future. You understand? So I'll point it out in this video for us. So now AI is actually operating at a faster speed than we humans, and AI can actually, you know, be more powerful in everything than we humans. And that is why we have to look for the alternative. So now we know every uh, innovative advancement, every civilization we actually, you know, come with this feasibility of getting people employed. But that is not the case for AI. We know that AI, by the time it reaches the AGI, AI will actually, hijack people's job. It will displace people of their jobs, and it's going to be a big problem for mankind. And so this particular live session is actually developed to it is actually developed to provide solution, rather to empower us to have alternative for AI, something we can actually, have control over, unlike the AI. So that is what we're going to actually do in this particular video. We're going to dive deep into time technology. Time technology is the technology that I was able to develop based on the unification of quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. And then it's a kind of computer on its own. But instead of using binary information system, it will be using quaternary. So it will be using four numbers, that namely -1, +1, -0, then +0. Those are the four numbers. So I will shed more light on that. So now let's have a look at what time technology is, just for us to, you know, so now this diagram that I have right here, you know, this is what is known as time technology. So the time energy information system. The time energy information system. So this is actually going to serve as the information system of time technology. Now, the information system that we're currently using, the way I see it, it's not capturing the entirety of what information is all about. I did a particular video on that. I have that on my YouTube channel. If you watch that, you get to know more about that. But basically, what this time technology will actually do is that it will initiate imaginary number that will be inversely related to a real number. So now the real number will be instantiated in this substrate dimension, while the imaginary number will be instantiated at complex level, which is at, higher dimension. For instance, if we have the substrate dimension to be 2D, the higher dimension will be 3D. So now this instantiation of imaginary number to real number will actually affect the needed balance for that instantiation to take place, more or less like when you have quantum entanglement. So at that higher dimension, the what that higher dimension we have will determine what will be instantiated in the substrate dimension. But basically, we're going to have the real mass what in the substrate dimension, because there is where our reality is. Now, similarly to what we observed in that video that I showed us, you see that when you have a plain paper, which is 2D, the ant on that paper would not be able to cross the border in order to explore the other side. That is, if you have the plain paper on the ground. But if you lift that 2D paper up so that the ant can actually cross the border to explore the other side, what you have done is that you have actually migrated that 2D paper into higher dimension. So you have connected it to higher dimension, which is 3D. And that is why in that video, they gave us example of what that could be by, deriving this Mobi strip. You understand? Now, the Mobi strip that we have, it has no boundary because when you have a strip and you turn it in order to, join the extreme ends of the strip, and not only that, you turn it, you twist it halfway, then by twisting it halfway, you have made it to travel into higher dimension. And by twisting it halfway, it has become a wave, not even the object anymore. And when you join it like that, then the boundary will be eliminated. It will have no boundary again because the 3D and the 2D, they are being unified to become a one. So when you have entanglement, the subscript emergent worth of electron is the same thing as the emergent mass worth of the higher dimension. So there is no difference. You understand? It's just that you have one to be inversely related to the other. And so that is why in this time technology, we have the instantiation of imaginary number and that of the real number. So then, when you now look at this, if you look at the curved dashed trajectory that I have up here, look at the extreme left where we have imaginary zero and real zero. There is this curved trajectory that I have right there. That curved trajectory, that is the analog part. So before we can actually have the instantiation of imaginary number and real number, then the trajectory that the particle must actually travel through will be this curved trajectory. And that curved trajectory can actually assume any number. It could be 0.1, it could be 001, it could be 0.00001, it could be any number. And by having that, we can then have this instantiation. That what we have there is known as hybrid. We have combination of analog information system and digital information system, unlike what we have in the conventional informational system, which is just binary. Binary is rigid. It is not flexible as this time technology's information system. And that is why it is not ideal for us to actually represent the information structure of the universe using this binary information system, because binary information system cannot adequately capture the full details. It cannot adequately capture the full details of electrical signal, because there are some instances where electrical signal will be so smooth, and I have that in that time energy wave model. I will expatiate on that. There is a point where electrical signal will be smooth, and apart from that, there are instances where electrical signal will not be completely quenched, Sure, you understand? So it will not be complete. There are instances where it will not be completely quenched. And if we are now saying that even when electrical signal is not completely off, it should be zero. It means we do not fully represent the information as it ought to be. And where the electrical signal is not even fully bright, we represent that to be one. It is totally wrong. But by having this time information system, we can actually go through that analog trajectory. In this case, because it is going at the uh, up region, because the trajectory is actually at the top region, the what we have there is plus. And so the value, when it reaches the topmost region, we're going to have advanced electrical signal in form of 1, and that is going to be positive 1 for us. So you can then see that we have imaginary number to be 0, we have the real number to be 0, but the determinant of the two numbers is plus 1. So then we know that the number that we're going to use will now be this real number. We can actually, neglect the imaginary number. So we can then compute the 0 in the digital. We can compute the 0 as digital information. And then when you look at the center of this diagram, you can see that the equilateral triangle is being flipped, inversely to what we have in this first diagram. And if we have it to be flipped as such, the emergence value will be 1. But then the trajectory, the curved trajectory, will have been flipped to the bottom region. And so we're going to have negative sign. So that curved trajectory can as well assume any number. And then we have to go through this trajectory for us to get the real number of 1, and then for us to get the imaginary number of 1. And once we have the real number 1, we can compute that as our digital information value. You understand? So basically, that is what time technology is all about. And this time technology, we actually get rid of the inherent noise in quantum entanglement for us to have, a kind of computer that can be as fast as AI, that we can operate and then use it to solve so many problems. So we're going to use our discretion to solve the problems operating the computer. But the advantage is that the computer will be so fast, and then it can actually, synthesize, many elements for us to quickly arrive at solution. Unlike AI is autonomous, and AI can actually, get things solved based on its own terms. So we shouldn't rely on that. We should actually, we know what we want to achieve, and then we can actually, operate this time technology computer to achieve that. With that, we have control, unlike, that of AI system. But then I need to let us know that there is every possibility for AI to actually do contrary to what we might, envisage, or we might want AI to do. Because when you look at human, you see that we always like to do what we want. And more especially, or more importantly, we just want to, be in charge. We want to be in control. And that is the source of all these global wars that we have. You will see a country wanting to control another country without, considering the fact that the people of that country still they have free will. You understand? So by that virtue of being able to do whatever it is that one can do, you understand? By having such feeling, it's something that actually gears toward what is known as ego. And ego will only be satisfied by being in charge, by being in control. And that is why we get this flair for control from. And if we do not understand that we can we can actually have influential power on people by impacting by having positive impact on people rather than by trying to control people coercively. You understand? So if we want people to be submissive to us, we can actually create things of value that people can benefit. That will make people to unanimously be unanimously submissive to us rather than controlling them and you know breed this kind of hatred in them that whenever they have opportunity or chance to retaliate, they can just do so. You understand? So that is why that is the source of the global war, the big problem we have in the universe. Now the theme is this: why is it that we must embark on this time technology? Now AI as we know it is not here to empower people in such a way that people will get skills and be employable. AI is here to actually hijack, people's job. That is number one reason we need to embark on this time technology. The number two reason is that academia will not escape this, because when you look at, the recently released Grok 4, Elon Musk said something. He said that he prayed that AI should actually work for the benefit of mankind, and that if that could not be the case, he prayed not to be alive to witness it. So these people that are fueling the AI technology, they know the danger, they know the impending danger. And because these people are capitalists, they still want to make profit. That profit is more important to them than the worth of life of people. You understand? So that being said, we know that there is every indication that AI might, do contrary to what we envisage, and yet we still continue to, develop AI. So because of that danger, that's another, huge reason we need to embark on this time technology. We need to develop this time technology. Then number three, there is this particular exam called human last exam, which is HLE, human last exam. That exam was actually, that exam by the professor, yes, by the exam was tried, was, solved or attempted by a PhD certified person. Is scored 5%. That same exam was attempted by AI. AI scored 50%. So that is telling you that AI will make education to be worthless. In fact, it will be worthless because when you get education, the essence of being educated is for you to get job, not to even just get anyhow job, to get a good job. But once that is no more the case, then education will be worthless. So these are three major points we need to actually develop the time technology and build this thing that can actually, you know, make this technology that will make people to be employable, that will give people control over what they do, even at the speed higher than the speed at which AI is currently operating, because we are talking about the speed of time. And I told you that time has two identities. By default, time is instant. And when time is in relativistic scaling with energy, it becomes continuous. So energy, on the other hand, has two identities. Energy is infinite by default. When in relativistic scaling with time, then it becomes discrete. So now we're going to be operating this time technology at instant speed, and that will give us leverage. It's going to be our power, and that is the reason we need to develop this. So right now, just as in that video, we have this possibility of, life and death, you understand? So now we have this possibility of choosing either time technology or AI. Though time technology is not being currently developed, it is a novel innovation, something I discovered, and I have a book on it on Amazon. People can get the book and then watch my video, especially Shotadiology series on YouTube, to be able to understand the concept of time technology and then develop it. But then it is basically for mankind, you understand, and just for us to really have this liberty. But then those companies that will develop this time technology should know that they have to consult me before they do so. You understand? So we have to reach agreement on that. But then any company can actually go ahead and develop the time technology, because to me, humans' life is more important than anything. But then if they want to fulfill all righteousness, they can then reach agreement with me so as to, really get the full copyright on that particular technology and let us reach agreement. So now, then, if you look at what I have below, to be informed is to be conscious. I will shed more light on that as we progress, but then we now know what consciousness is through the application of formula of everything by unifying quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. You understand? And then by knowing what consciousness is, we get to know that signature of Almighty God is encoded in information. That is why information is highly essential. It is not something that we can joke with. So this time we need to get it right, even though we have, done what we shouldn't have done by developing AI. But then there is this choice that we have now. But the thing is, I don't know how intensely AI is so interwoven with cloud. I don't know how intensely it is so interwoven with cloud, because if it is so or deeply interwoven with cloud, then it will mean that the data centers all over the world will be destroyed. And if that is the case, we're not going to have, internet. The virtue of internet is gone. But now the stakeholders, should actually swing to action. And if there is anything they can do to stop the development of AI, they should go ahead and do it. Or probably it might be after this time technology. This time technology is fully developed and operational, that they will then embark on that. And if that is not possible, but there is, with God, everything is possible. If that is not possible, it's a big issue. It is a big issue. Okay, so now let's look at what we stand to benefit by having time technology. Imaginary number is an inverse determinant of what real number to get in analog information system. The inverse relationship of time's instancy to energy's infinity is the flexible structure of space to adequately accommodate mass worth from 0 through to 1. Now, when you look at this digital information space structure, it is rigid. When you have a mass worth right inside these chunks of boxes that we have, that data might not completely occupy the space, and yet the remaining spaces will be there doing nothing. But with this time technology, the space structure will be flexible such that it will adequately accommodate data without adding any additional space to it at all. So because of that, we're going to have this optimization of space usage, and then dynamic mass worth to flexible space defines a system ideal for growing universe. So now I'll still talk about this growing universe, and I'll talk about nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. But before I do that, I just want to, what I have right here, this diagram that I have here, this is what is known as time energy wave model. When you look at it, by applying that formula of everything, we're going to have this diagram. The curvature, which is the black curvature, is the trajectory of time, while this red curvature is the trajectory of energy. That is the kind of relationship we have between time and energy. And right inside it, we have this nested linear solution of that formula of everything. And that will give us this equilateral triangle. And then right at the left edge, we have inflationary suspension. Right at the right end, we have neutron star suspension. So we have the neutron star suspension right inside the black hole, and the central trajectory is the event horizon, and that vertical trajectory represents the default trajectory of time, which is instant. The dashed horizontal trajectory represents the default trajectory of energy, which is infinite. But then when you look at this structure, you can get to see the four numbers. The kind of number that we have right before the Big Bang, that is plus zero. Plus zero will discharge positive mass worth, and because of that like sign of those worth, they will have to travel inversely to one another, and that would allow for this expansion as we have it. But then the trajectory would be towards another zero, which in this case is negative zero at the topmost region. Look at where we have plus one. There is minus zero there, so the trajectory will go towards there, and at the bottom we have another negative zero. So the other trajectory will go towards that. But then the worth will be suspended, and so we're going to have advanced charged, and that will be plus 1. So the one at the bottom will be negative 1. And from this, you can see that we have, the four number, the quaternary number that the time technology we use. Then at this bottom, we're going to have this standing wave that will connect us to higher dimension. So it is not so ideal for substrate dimension to harness its full potential without connecting to higher dimension. So in the universe, we have this interlocking of dimensions, and you know that dimensions are, degree of power and freedom. They are degrees of power and freedom. Yes, okay. So now, by connecting to higher dimension, we can then have the instantiation of electron in the nucleus, relative to that emergent of positron at higher dimension. So now when we now have the integration of that positron of higher dimension into the substrate dimension, energy will be energized at this event horizon, and that will propel momentum into the core singularity of the black hole. So then we have another negative zero there. So you can see from this diagram that the only zero that that has power to discharge is the plus zero. Other zeros will be negative zero because they absorb, they try to absorb, you understand, but because of that inverse momentum of the charged particles, we have a kind of balance that is caused by that, by that standing wave that is being projected into the higher dimension. And so we have, the worth being suspended without traveling through the negative at, without traveling through the negative zero at the present phase. But then by the time it gets to the core singularity of the black hole, then it can actually travel through. So that is the whole idea about time technology. So time technology, we use quaternary, just as we have at the bottom right here, and the numbers are plus 0, plus 1, negative 0, negative 1. So digital computer, it uses binary numbers. So now let me use other diagram. There are other diagrams I want to use. So now I want to see I want to see I have so many diagrams right here. So many diagrams. But I'm looking for I want to use ideal diagram. Okay, so this is the diagram I want to use. Okay, so now this diagram, I call it time slice architecture of time energy causation. And the reason I want to use this is for the fact that I'll be able to, show you the formula of everything, then explain to you how that formula is being applied for us to, have this diagram as we have it. Now, the formula of everything I've been talking about is this dt dm equal to capital Um plus 4m. Now, this formula, the TDM stands for, the curvature of time to energy. The blue curvature is the curvature of time, while the red curvature is the curvature of energy. Right inside it, we have this equilateral triangle, because when you look at the formula, the capital Um plus 4m is a linear solution, and it is nested right inside the curvature. But then, what we need to know here is that I want to let you know that this initial equilateral triangle represents the expanding cosmological space, while the flipped equilateral triangle represents the contracting phase of the black holes in the universe. So when you have, for instance, if we should supply the mass worth of electron, which is what we have right here, this value, if we should put this value right in the place of these two m's, what we're going to get will be this classical mass worth, which is 2,277,250,000 kilogram. From that, you can get to see that, we move from the quantum realm to the classical realm. So now this top region from the dashed horizontal line is the classical realm, while this bottom region from the dashed horizontal line to the bottom is the quantum realm. So now, but then when you look at this formula of everything, you see that it is more or less like a classical math. So there is nothing like quantum in it at all. So it is not a kind of quantum mathematics. It is only classical mathematics. But then, why must it just be a classical mathematics? The reason it has to be a classical mathematics, it is not far-fetched. When you look at, I'm going to give you an analogy now. Let's say somebody is on Earth. Being on Earth is more or less like, being in the system. Once you are part of the system, you can't get to see the true reality. You understand? So by being on Earth, you might just believe that the Earth is flat. But then, if you should travel away from the Earth into the space to a certain distance, yes, to a certain distance, then you can get to see the full picture of the Earth. And from that, you can get to know that the Earth is not flat. So you see the full shape, you know that Earth is spherical. But then, the thing is this: being where you are to the Earth, you can only get, the, overall picture or the overview picture of the Earth. But then you are being deluded of the reality of the people on the Earth. That is the trade-off that is right there. So what that is telling you is that you are suspended to the Earth to get the reality. More or less, as we have this big blue convergence to be suspended, you can see that it is not touching the curvature. It is being suspended to that curvature. And so the virtue of, traveling out of Earth is more or less like this connection that we have to the higher dimension. You understand? By connecting to a higher dimension, we can get the reality of the substrate dimension, even though the higher dimension to substrate dimension, by the virtue of entanglement, they are the same thing. But then the substrate dimension is the playground for reality. And so by being at higher dimension, we can get the reality, just as by being at a certain distance to the Earth, you can get to see the reality of the Earth. So that is it. But then, let's say you now travel so deeply into the space that the Earth now becomes a tiny spot. At that point, you can actually refer to that tiny point as the quantum realm, relative to where you are in the space. By the virtue of localization, where you are, you can actually, call that a classical realm. So based on that, so you can see how we can get what quantum is and what classical is, even without having this quantum experience. You understand? So that is why it is possible for us to have this formula of everything, which is totally classical by its derivation to solve this problem for us. So now, because at that point the earth is so tiny, you can't get to know any detailed information about earth. So you can actually liken it to a class, I mean to a quantum mechanics. Why where you are relative to that is known as classical mechanics. But then let's say you now move away from the earth such that earth is now out of sight. At that point where the earth is out of sight, that is what is known as complex mechanics. So where you have to where that earth is, even though it is out of sight, you can actually, we can call that a classical reality to the quantum reality. But then, even though the earth is out of sight, it is somewhere in the space. You understand? So now, the only way you can get to know where that earth is, the only way you can get to know the exact location of where the earth is by traveling at the speed of time, is by traveling instantly to where that earth is. Now, I want to give you a picture of what relativity is. You know that if we're to consider the tiny spot of earth to where you are, I call that quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. But then if you approach the earth, you will realize that the earth as well is approaching you, because there will be this emergent central point between you and the earth, and that will be constrained, that will be expanded or retracted based on the arrangement of time to energy. And then you will realize that as you're approaching the earth is approaching you, then both of you will always meet at that central point, because you'll be approaching each other at equal speed. So that is what relativity is. So now, if you should try to approach the earth, even though it is out of sight rather, the earth as well will be approaching you, and then you will never get to meet the earth at its exact position. But then, if we're to get reality, we need to actually travel at the speed of time. And that is why it is so essential for us to have this instant default trajectory of time to empower us to have the reality. And the reality that we have at the speed of time is what actually breeds the objective conscious experience. So now, I said something the other time that this initial equilateral triangle is the expanding cosmological space, and we can as well liken that to nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion in the sense that when you have deuterium and tritium being merged together, you are going to have bigger element, which is helium. And so Okay, so now we can get to see that when we have the merging of deuterium to tritium, we're going to have bigger elements which will be helium. And by having bigger elements, we actually allow for expansion in the nucleus, because don't forget we call it nuclear fusion. But then we know that the, what am I going to call it? The system or the catalyst that is actually causing that to happen is a kind of endothermic kind of reaction. Like it's something that happens, rather. Let me say what I truly know. Like it's something that actually happens internally. You understand? But then when it comes to nuclear fission, it is a kind of external, we have this introduction of external catalyst to cause, the reaction of nuclear fission, because the neutron, we must have a neutron that will be, injected into the nucleus, and to make it more unstable and then break that, it will decay that into, for instance, let's say we have this uranium 235. Uranium 235 is, you know relatively unstable. But the moment we have injection of neutron, that will make it to be more super unstable. And so it will break it into krypton, I think, yes, krypton 92, and then barium 141. You understand? So basically, that kind of external introduction of neutron, that is what we have at this event horizon. And so that is what we're going to dissect right now, for you to understand that even though we have the formula of everything to be classical in its entire derivation, it explains, it gives us, the true meaning of things that are, it gives us the true explanation to things that are happening at quantum level. So now let's see. The thing is this: when you look at this diagram, I said when you supply the quantum mass worth, we're going to get this classical counterpart. But then if you substitute this classical counterpart in the place of this 2m, what you are going to get is 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32. By having it to be minus 32, it shows that that worth is being decayed. And the implication of that is that this vertical trajectory is being shifted into the black hole, into the future. So what that is telling us is that we can only apply this vertical trajectory one time if we want to get, the genuine location of, particle or whatever it is in the universe. We just apply it once, even though we can travel back and forward, you understand, but we need to actually apply it once. So now don't forget that we use the electron's mass worth, which is what we know, to get the classical counterpart that we don't know. By that, we have traversed the vertical trajectory the first time. And by now supplying this classical mass worth to reconfirm the quantum mass worth, it means that we are traversing it the second time. And because we're doing so the second time, the worth is being decayed, and it's an indication that it has shifted into the black hole. So now the thing is this. Now, what the question we need to ask is that we know that right here, the classical mass worth is right inside the equilateral triangle. But then the quantum mass worth is outside even the time energy wave constraint. It is outside that. So that is telling us that the quantum mass worth is gotten from the higher dimension. But then how do we get to the higher dimension? We get to the higher dimension by having what is known as standing wave. So how do we get that? Let me quickly explain that. By the time we supply this classical mass worth in the place of these two m's, in order for us to reconfirm the quantum mass worth that we initially used, what we get is not the quantum mass worth. The answer that we get is this 5.7 times 10 raised to power 48. But then, when we now expand this in standard form, we're going to have the suspension of the base value of the electron, but it's not going to be in form of 9.109. It's going to be 9,109. That will be suspended at 32nd position. And then you know that we have couple of zeros to suspend it at that position, and so we have some other zeros at the back. For us to really have now the value that we have, the answer that we have represent the curvature of this time trajectory. Don't forget that even though we have this linear diagonal trajectory, time, the way it travels, it if you try to get the relationship between distance and time, you know that even this linear diagonal trajectory, by mechanics, by time trajectory, it is not diagonal, because the time that object will travel even on a ramp which is diagonal will be time squared of its speed. What do I mean by that? If you have an arbitrary measure of the distance that an object moves from one point to other point to be one, let's call it Galileo 1, and you measure the time it takes that object to move from that initial point to the later point to be time 1, G1. So I call the arbitrary measure to be G1. Then I call the time measure to be T1. Now, if you want that object to travel that distance, to travel another distance worth of G2, you will realize that instead for that movement from initial point to that G2 point to be times 2 of the initial measure, it will be that distance worth squared. So 2g squared will give you 4. Instead of it to be, you have one initial measure, the other additional measure will be 1. Instead for it to be 2, it's going to be 4. And from that, you can get to know that it is not linear. It is not linear in time. And that is I will still use another diagram to dissect this to for you to be able to understand. Now let me expatiate on that for you to really understand. Now let's look at what we have here. This blue diagonal line is the time action to move from this Big Bang singularity to where we have this big blue curvature. And being the time action must also have a reaction of energy which will travel inversely to it. And so we have this red diagonal line to this big red convergence, which is quantum arbitrary suspension. So now you can see that the value that we have for this red diagonal trajectory is 5.7 times 10 raised to power minus 32, while this is 5.7 times 10 raised to power 32. So now from that you can say that it is symmetric because you have the equal trajectory of blue diagonal line for that red diagonal line. But basically, if you look at what is really happening, it is not symmetric. Now, what we have here, you can see that the quantum mass worth is not within the equilateral triangle. It means that we have a constantly decaying mechanism in this quantum realm to facilitate the mass accumulation at the classical realm. So the operation is asymmetric, even though the trajectory, is linear. You understand? So that is what that is telling you. But then we have this value, we'll expand it. We know that we have a couple of zeros suspending the base worth of quantum mass. But then we will now need to manually annihilate only the suspended zeros for us to have this vertical trajectory. But why is it possible? Why is it possible for us to actually annihilate the suspended zero for us to have this vertical trajectory? Well, zero can actually serve as a placeholder for 9. For instance, let's say you have 2 times 9. 2 times 9 will give you 18. But then there is a way you can actually do it to get that 18 as well. That 9, you can convert it to 0, merge that to that 2, that will give you 20. Now take that 2, flip it just as we are going to have this flipping mechanism at the central trajectory to have this inversely related equilateral triangle, the one that we have in the black hole. Then take that to flip it to give you minus 2. So when you now say 20 minus 2, that will give you 18. Now you can do that to any number of 9, be it in tenths, be it in 100, you will still get same answer. For instance, let's say 2 times 99. 2 times 99 will give us, I think that will give us 189. I mean, yes, that will give us, that will give us 198. Sorry, it will give us 198. Okay, so now, if you should replace the 29 with 0, you are going to have 2 zeros. Add that to that 2, that will give you 200. Take that 2, flip it such that you have it to be minus 2. Then you now have 200 minus 2 will give you 198. So because of that virtue of 9 can either serve as placeholder for, I mean, because of that virtue of 0 can serve as a placeholder for 9, then we can manually annihilate the suspended zeros. And what that is telling us is that we are having free fall here, which is the classical gravity. We are having a kind of fall that is not accumulating mass worth. You understand? So that is the classical gravity for you. And so by annihilating the suspended zero, for us to annihilate, we're going to say that's 9,109 all over 10 raised to power 32. When we'll expand that fraction, we're going to have it to be 9.109 times 1 all over 10 raised to power 32. So when we solve that further, it's going to be 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32. And so what we now have is something that is smaller to the initial electron that we use. But then, can that ensure this vertical trajectory that we have up to the higher dimension, if that is the case? Because it is more or less like saying the answer we get is smaller to what we should get. And if what we get is not the same thing, if what we get at higher dimension is not the same thing with what we're going to have in the substrate dimension, it's an indication that the trajectory is not vertical. But just the same way, just as, I mean, when you inject neutron into the nucleus of uranium, when you inject that into the uranium of 235, it makes it to be more unstable, but then the 235 will become 236 because, it's an addition to it. So that 236 will just be temporarily instantiated before it get broken into the krypton and the other part that we have, barium. You understand? So now the same thing is what is actually happening right here. The moment we break this quantum arbitrary suspension by the virtue of instant trajectory of time, which is the free fall, which is the same thing as classical gravity, then we're going to have spontaneous symmetry breaking. And by having spontaneous symmetry breaking, we're going to have mass convergence. Now we have mass convergence in this quantum nucleus. You can see what we have here. Here, it is called quantum nucleus because here we have compacted equilateral triangle. That equilateral triangle will actually allow us to have constantly accelerated momentum. By having constantly accelerated momentum, then the time slice will be so string that we allow the mass accumulation that we have in this nucleus to align with the curvature of this energy. And so we're going to have standing wave that will be projected into the higher dimension. It will initially connect to the electron of that higher dimension and then instantly convert it to positron. What we have at higher dimension is the balance that we couldn't have had in the nucleus as a result of the pressure, temperature. You understand? But by connecting to higher dimension and by having relativity in place, then we have this virtue of higher degree of freedom and power, and then we can have the instantiation of positron, which is the positron of that past electron, and that will allow us to have the instantiation of the substrate dimensions electron, which is the past electron. And so by having that, the positron will then be injected into the substrate dimension. Now, the moment the positron is injected into the substrate dimension, then we're going to have the worth to be reduced to that 9.10, I mean 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32, because then this vertical trajectory will not be vertical trajectory anymore. It will be shifted, and so we're going to have that reduction, just as we have the reduction as the nucleus of that uranium is being broken into, krypton and barium. You understand? So that is what will then happen. And then that decaying virtue of the decaying that we have at the power, don't forget that we have that decay at the power of this electron, which is just the difference of minus one. That that decay virtue will as well affect the classical mass worth if we should put that 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32 in this formula of everything to reconfirm this classical mass worth. We will then discover that this classical mass worth will have been decayed by almost 2 billion. So the tiny negative one at the power of electron, the decay, the decay effect at the power of that electron mass worth will affect the classical mass worth by that at that huge mass decay. So that is how we can actually track. The decay. But basically, what you now get is that by the time you complete the circle, when you move, let's say we use the original electron mass to get the classical mass worth. We use the classical mass worth to reconfirm the electron's mass worth, but we get 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32. That is the first three. We complete the circle. If we should put minus 32 and then we have the value being decayed at the classical level to give us, what we have, which is in millions, not in billions again. Then we then say that when we now use that value in the formula of everything to reconfirm this classical mass worth, then the minus 32 will have been retracted back, or will have been moved forward to minus 31 again. So it will get back to that original power of original power of that original electron, but the base value will be decayed down to 1.1. So now you can only reiterate the application of formula of everything the second time till you, at that second trial, you are going to hit what is known as infinite loop, because by having the base to be 1.1 times 10 raised to power minus 31, if you should put that in the formula of everything, what you now get will now be infinite loop. Then it means you have reached the maximum limit. You have reached the maximum limit of that suspension. But then what do we have in this system? What we have in the system now, this inflationary suspension that we have to where we have this Big Bang singularity, that is the compacted equilateral triangle, which is the nucleus of the past. That nucleus right there, we have energy being ahead of time. By being ahead of time, That is why we could have this inflationary suspension. You can see that the inflationary suspension will just be for a short while, and then time at this vertical trajectory is now ahead of energy, and that is why we could have mass accumulation and then have, the continuous nature of time flow to that discrete nature of energy. And then you see that the time slice is, slanted as what we have, showing that time is ahead of energy. And it's only when time is ahead of energy that we could, have mass convergence. So as we are constantly having mass what being decayed at quantum level, that mechanics is supporting the mass accumulation at classical level. But then when it reaches the central point, then the energy will be moved forward such that it will be synchronized or rearranged to align for us to really have this vertical trajectory. But then when we now have the trajectory of time coming towards the energy, don't forget energy is ahead of time. In this, energy is ahead of time from this big blue convergence to this big red convergence. And that is why we could have that free fall, because anytime energy is ahead of time, it's the mechanics is decay. So it will decay. There is not going to be mass worth at all. So there will be no accumulation of mass worth. So then you can see that we have the free fall. So, but then when we now have spontaneous symmetry breaking, because we have compacted the equilateral triangle, then we could have mass accumulation because time trajectory is now ahead of energy at this point. We could have mass accumulation. You understand that can actually shrink, time slice to something that can, align with the energy curvature. So that is that. But in the black hole, what do we have? In the black hole, energy is being energized at this event horizon. And so we have energy ahead of time. So that is why we could have that decaying mechanics right inside the black hole. But the moment it reaches the vertical trajectory of this suspension, then we have time being ahead of energy. But then there is this big battle here, because like I said the other time, the base worth of electron is being decayed down to 1.1, but the power is being restored. So we have this quasar like signal, the swing forth and back of quasar. That is what we have right inside the core singularity of the black hole. So when you reiterate the application of formula of everything, the final result you get will now be the quasar like signal in the core singularity of the black hole. So this is the formula that has solved so many problems, so many challenges, like the challenges of matter antimatter conundrum, the almost empty nature of atom and things like that. It has solved everything. If you want to know more about it, you can, check my video, the ones I've uploaded on YouTube, and then make sure you watch, the entitle of Shotadiology. Shotadiology is a novel, is a newly proposed field in science. It's a field that integrates God into science, because by evolution, scientists are trying to take God out of the equation, but there is no way you can get this full reality of the universe without having the signature of Almighty God. So we have the signature of Almighty God by having this instant feedback right from the higher dimension, back to this classical mass what as what is known as objective conscious experience. So by having the classical mass what to be suspended to this intersection of vertical trajectory and horizontal trajectory, it means that classical mass what cannot be conscious of anything it operates with until there is that instant feedback from the complex level. So now, once we have that being injected, it is so tiny, the injection of that reality from the higher dimension, just like we could, be ascertained of the full reality of the earth while being away from the earth. So by the time we have that, then energy will be energized, we go towards the core singularity of the black hole. But in the core singularity, we have electron being suspended. That means electron right there is in the infinite state. But then the classical mass what will be relocated to this intersection point of vertical trajectory to horizontal trajectory as the subjective conscious experience, which will then become the personal reality of that classical mass worth. So the internalization of what is being injected right from the higher dimension is the subjective conscious experience that we have, while the injection that we have from the higher dimension into the substrate dimension, that is the objective conscious experience that we allow us to know the exact location of the particle in the higher dimension relative to the particle or the mass in the substrate dimension. So that is that. So that objective conscious experience is more or less like, having self-awareness. You understand? So with that, we know that the signature of Almighty God is actually encoded in that, you know, in that information. So the only way we can have that instant transmission is by having it through information, because what this is telling us is that when you have genuine contact at one point, you must have suspension at the other side. So we have genuine contact at complex level, but then we have suspension at classical level in the substrate dimension. So that is it. And then you can see that the subjective conscious experience is being mixed with noise because it is being retracted into substrate dimension, and so it is so compacted in that nucleus that the that electron is not being fully defined, which is more or less like what we have right here. So now when you put this value 5.7 times 10 raised to power minus 48 in the formula of everything, you can get to see how mass water being accumulated in the nucleus towards this curvature of energy. But then we could only have the mass what being accumulated around electron. Electron is not being defined until we have connection to the higher dimension, such that we have the electron of that dimension being instantly converted to positron for us to have the genuine, instantiation of the substrate electron. So that is that, and that is how that could be, related to nuclear fusion and nuclear fission. So that is that. So this formula of everything is so powerful that it feeds back on itself. It means that you can use an input to generate an output, then use that generated output as input to generate further output. So now let me briefly show us another diagram that can actually, prove to us that right inside the equilateral triangle we actually have. Now this is the diagram that can actually prove to us that right inside the equilateral triangle we actually have, this kind of that we actually have a kind of asymmetric nature being embedded right inside. So now let's look at this. When you have this kind of number pattern such that you have one, and then in the next layer beneath that one you have 1 plus 2, and then next layer you have 1 plus 2 plus 3. If you have it like this, you are going to have a equilateral triangle. It is an equilateral triangle because when you count this constancy of 1, don't forget that 1 is being repeated right here, so I call it constancy of 1. If you count this constancy of 1, you have it in 10 places. If you then count this variation of 1 to 3 down to the 0, you have it in 10 places. And if you count this variation of 1 to 0 at the base, you have it to be 10 places. And by that, we could say this is an equilateral triangle. But then, look at what we have. We have constancy of 1, but if you then look at what I have written here, it says expanding phase by constancy. But look at what I have at the extreme end here. It says contracting phase by variation. Why is it that we have contracting phase by variation and then we have expanding phase by constancy? Well, if you count this one, you have it in 10 places. If we're to count these number patterns diagonally towards the right side, you see that they get contracted as they move towards the right side. And that is why they get contracted by variation, just as we have in that compacted equilateral triangle in the nucleus of the future. In that time energy wave model that I showed you, you know that we have compacted equilateral triangle, and as a result of that, we could have constantly accelerated momentum that can actually shrink the slice of time, and that time will be sliced variably. You understand? Not that the time slice will be shrinked constantly. It will be shrinked variably in order for it to be aligned with the curvature of energy for us to have the standing wave. That is what we're actually having right here. And that is why you know the distance, the relationship of distance to time is as what I just explained earlier, which is not linear. So now, when you count this 1, you have it in 10 places. The 2, you have it in 9 places. If you count the 3 diagonally, you have it in 8 places. If you count the 4, you have it in 7 places. If you count the 5, you have it in 6 places. If you count the 6, you have it in 5 places. You count the 7, you have it in 4 places. You count the 8, you have it in 3 places. You count the 9, you have it in 2 places, down to the 0. Now, you can see how that works. Then it simply means that when you have contraction at one side, you must have expansion at the other side. And that is why in the cosmological space, we have this expansion that can actually accommodate additional speed as arbitrary mass worth, which is more or less like energy density. So what we have in the core singularity of the Big Bang is different from what we have in the core singularity of the black hole. In the Big Bang, we have energy density. In the black hole singularity, we have mass density. But then that can actually be flipped, just as we have at the present phase. So the flipping mechanism that we have and the feedback at instant speed is what I call signature. That's what I call signature of Almighty God. So now we have that to be this. But then let's look at this base variation to this topmost one. Then it shows that at the point where you have genuine contact, which is the point where we have genuine contact at complex level, don't forget that we have the classical mass worth in the substrate dimension to be suspended to the intersection of time trajectory to energy trajectory. And by having it to be that suspended, it means that when time is being so strained to the extent that it allows you to have a genuine contact, then you are going to have it being balanced by the suspension, which will give you the infinite momentum. That is what we actually have. So now look at this expansion to zero. It is the infinite momentum that we have as we have the genuine contact at the topmost one. So that is the, even right inside the equilateral triangle, you have asymmetric nature. Equilateral triangle is meant to be symmetric, but then by its operation, it is asymmetric. And so that is the entitle of, the universe per mass worth or per particle. So when you put particles worth in the formula of everything, you get the equivalence of full potential of that particle at universal level. That is it. But then that that diagonal worth will actually vary based on the size of what you put in the formula. But then if we then try to get all the mass worth of all the entities in the universe and put inside the formula, then we can get the end limit of the universe. So universe is going to be a closed system because, of course, we must as well have the cosmological expansion to be flipped such that we have the contraction of that. So that is what I need to say here. And with this, we should know that there is signature of Almighty God in the universe.